No gravitrons, I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. opponent offers a rematch, I'll accept. But I'm really excited to review this game, so I'm not going to actually offer a rematch right away. Alright, so I haven't been offered a rematch quite yet, and I'll say that it's fair for me to review this game now. I'm really glad about how this game went. First game of the day, and my impressions were that my opponent played a logical, straightforward game, and I played a little bit better, and maybe had some good technique in the end game when we saw that there were 2 rooks and pawns per side, and then there was 1 rook and pawns per side, and I believe I played that end game well. Well, let's see what the evaluating computer engine can tell us. So it wasn't as accurate as I thought. 79% isn't the end of the world. 67% is not all that accurate either. So that's kind of a bummer. Sort of offbeat or irregular openings. You just want to mostly stick to, if you're faced with b4, or you're playing black and your opponent plays 1b4. Yeah, I agree with my coach here. Consider it a gimmick opening meant to surprise black. This doesn't directly battle for the center. That's quite exactly how I would characterize that. So I had no idea about book for 1b4, how to respond. But I didn't want to play e4, or rather, I didn't want to play e5 in response. Because after bishop b2, I'm saying, oh, I'll hold on to my pawn with knight c6, right? The knight holds on to the pawn, but then b5 unsettles this knight, and I probably go to a square that looks strong like d4, but this isn't good for black. So I said, fine. What I've been taught is these types of situations, you don't know the first move. Just kind of stick with your opening principles. Stick with what works in other openings. I had to rule out e5 because of bishop b2. And then pawn to d5 is fine. It's good. It's considered book in some way. But the main idea is that this is a central pawn that black can hold on to. Even if attacked, it's held on to by the queen at d8. So it's just a more flexible way for black to stake a claim in the center and early. Knight f6. White comes with this strong bishop. The Fianchetto bishop on b2 is quite strong. And I say knight f6, so you're not getting to g7 where you might win the exchange or something on h8. You're not getting all the way through to h8. I'm going to put up this blockade made out of my knight, and he is supported by 2 pawns and by x-ray, some would say a queen from d8. Alright, so this is just solid chess. We're not looking to go wham bam and punish my opponent for playing b4. Frankly, that's what your opponent is most likely going to want. Say, I'll grab that pawn and 3 queens. It doesn't work like that. Just play some solid, straightforward chess, and know that built into, it's a little bit tricky, but built into your opponent's rating are wins from people who try to punish this pawn move right away and overextend their minor pieces early and so on. So if you play a little bit softer, but stick with principles, you'll be playing the part of that chess rating that doesn't know what to do if they don't have some kind of advantage off the beginning. Sort of. That's sort of the idea I'm going for. People who play trick openings, their ratings are partially their ratings, if they have a high rating, is partially because there are wins in there included from people who fell for the trap, so to speak. So don't fall for the trap. Stick to solid chess opening IQ, like occupying and controlling the center is what I went for here. Solid moves from black. This even in my mistakes. This is not a mistake, inaccuracy. Knight to c6. I agree, it's an inaccuracy because if pawn to b5 looks strong, bishop b5 looks strong. The knight's better. The knight's more well placed on d7. But even the mistakes are inaccuracies, so to speak. Just developing towards the center. If pawn to b5, then it probably turns out okay for black somehow. I'm looking for how. Maybe knight a5, and he's on the edge, but he's not really. He's not lost. He's not going to be captured right away or anything. We've got a semi-permanent outpost on c4. So not only that, if perhaps at a5 he's challenged somehow by white's bishop, we could push b6 to protect the knight and even have to, in some cases, bring him back to b7. But why is this an inaccuracy then? Because who wants to pay all that much attention to my queen's knight this early in the game? If it's not for, attacking. Just to hold on to this knight, yes, it can be done, but it's strained, okay? So I agree with my coach and Torch 4 that this is an inaccuracy. I think I'm better off. I'll go to the analysis part here. I probably was better off with knight b d7. You see, knight b d7 is right up there with the very top of them, almost tied for the top. These moves that are all showing the game as almost exactly equal. All these moves are like that, and so that's fine. c6 needs to move, but now, yeah. So it's a good move. Knight b d7 would have been better, but I didn't play it. Oh well, we'll get him next time, or even this time, because b5 wasn't played, and even if it were, it wasn't the end of things. All right, so what are we going? d4 blocks in. White's, yeah, I'm critical of this move. This blocks White's fiend shadowed bishop. It's not good, not good. But I play queen d6 with the idea of opening up the position anyway, which might not be so great because then White improves the value of the bishop at b2. But on the other hand, I have a knight jumping around on White's king side and queen side. This knight would be very strong, so it's hard to tell. Knight to d2. Pawn to e5 is considered a blunder. Woe is me. 0.7 and then now about 2, so it's out a pawn and a third of a blunder. Yeah, because what I think I'm seeing here is when I played this move, I didn't account for the bishop on b2. Let's see what Torch has b5. It's called removing the defender, or in this case, I think it's called deflecting the defender. It's not going to necessarily capture the knight, but the knight has to move to avoid being captured, and then now White has two. Now White has 2 against 1 on the e5 square, and so it happens to be a little bit worse than that, because after, say, I guess the line would go b5 and something like knight e7 or even knight a5. But then knight takes d4 with complications. But under most lines, White's going to respond with d takes e5, forking the knight and queen, this is going to end up, white is going to end up winning. He'll have a winning position, but maybe not totally won. There's still life in it, but this knight is gone. That's not good. That's not good. I have to eliminate blunders like e5 from my game. Not all the time. I mean, not all e5s are blunders, right? e4, e5. Ha. All right. D takes e5. Knight takes e5. Yeah, D takes e5 right away here by white. Missed the tactic that I missed, that my opponent missed, but Torch found here with pawn to b5, a move earlier. So I can take away the arrow and highlight on this one. Knight takes e5. And now black's doing fine. Well, even. Well. And there's this sort of like looming attack on a1. It's not a big deal because the rook can move, or white can build this into some sort of part of his own attack or some kind of doubling, but the white's knight on b3 can protect the rook. But you know, look at the game. Forget about, so maybe it was a little bit too much about that rook. Look at the center. Black is controlling the center very strongly here in still the early going at move 8. Queenside castles is already available. We got a bishop here that, though he hasn't been developed yet, he has a good development square on e6, an excellent development square on d6, and in the event of c5, b takes c5, bishop takes c5 is another great option to develop my f8 bishop, at which point black will have another castling option available. Black's doing well here. E2 prepares the white king for castle, but doesn't do anything about the threat on c2. So capture on c2. My opponent didn't want to trade queens. I might have. My thinking here was I could initiate a queen trade, but let's give my opponent one more opportunity to do so, whereupon bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, bishop takes c2, and maybe that bishop isn't also well placed. Rook c1, the bishop retreats to a safe square, and then rook takes c7. So maybe it would have been better to initiate the swap of queens on d1. That's what Torch 4 likes. Move I played wasn't bad either, because now I'm protecting this c7 pawn that you know, the queen can retreat without losing a pawn on c7, without our losing a pawn on c7. So we initiate the queen trade, and the tactics are fine. It's a little bit dicey. We have to be careful. We see here that there's only one move that's black, and these other moves are all white. All favor white to the tune of 3 points or more. So that means that this is a sharp moment for black to find the right move. Doesn't mean it's a winning move. Torch has us up by about a pawn and a tenth of a pawn, and 1.1 pawns or 1.2 pawns. It's not a winning move, but it's the only good move here for black. But it's there. Queen takes d1. One rook or the other collects. The rook at f is fine. There's nothing. They're probably pretty close to whichever rook should capture. You see both rooks here. Rook at a takes d1 is fine, and rook at f takes d1 is slightly better. So some groundwork for a end game, and Black has to remember that his bishop on f5 is hanging. Yeah, I thought about this move for a bit. What do we have? For 22 seconds. This is important for me personally because I thought about this move for almost half a minute, and I came up with bishop to g6, and I agree with Torch that this is not a good move. This is a mistake. I was not sure between bishop g6 and bishop e6. E6 is super solid. This f7, e6, and d5 are all sort of one group. It's not a pawn chain because the bishop's in the middle, but he's a really strong defensive bishop. And I was thinking, though, okay, I might do that. And we have to understand that there's the possibility of knight takes e6, pawn takes e6. And that's actually not that bad for black. I thought on g6, don't I have an awesome diagonal? I feel like my bishop's stronger on g6 than on e6 as a good defensive bishop on e6, but this scope was important in my decision. And now I'm seeing also that bishop to h5 could initiate a favorable trade under some circumstances. Knight to h5 could initiate a favorable trade under some circumstances. With the bishop at g6, a kingside castle, and it's hard to imagine a safer black king. So I played bishop to g6. Torch indicates bishop to d7. This is another place to move, and I think that bishop d7 is more principled. This is solid. This is, as I explained, with the strong range of attack and then ideas on h5. But bishop to d7, and we want to look at the bishops there, and now there's this V shape controlling the knight. I'll even move the bishop here to show it. Control the knight. See that the bishop has all the aggressive squares for the knight controlled. All right, it's another great way to make black's light squared bishop a strong defensive piece, and he retains a lot of scope on the queen side, and he retains a lot of scope on the king side. I like this. This is an awesome and subtle best move suggestion by Torch 4. Bishop to d7 is very strong. Bishop to d3 by my opponent sort of asks black to make a strengthening move. It's not all that bad, but it's not, I don't know, it's a move. So I made the strengthening move, pawn to c6. I'm castling. Both sides are centralizing rooks. I don't want to go over this part here in too much detail. I think that it was clear that the bishops were gonna swap. I probably missed something better. A5 as Torch would have it. That's not compelling to me. I can't. We see this top suggestion here. The material doesn't sort of work out in black's favor for really quite a while. I can't calculate that. I can't calculate that in a game in 10 minute per side. I like it though. I like to see it anyway because it's closer to the chess truth of it. So a5 is the best move. It's for reasons that are beyond my calculative ability, uh, at least for games in 10 minute per side. Perhaps at a tournament level of time control, I might eventually search and find something like this, but I'm not even sure of that. So a5 is a great suggestion here by Torch. I like this continuation. I played bishop e4, which was a miss, a bit of a miss it seems. 7-5, but I missed this. Or was it about a half pawn off of the second best option? 17 rook e7. It's not the end of the world. I'm capturing with my e pawn, of course, because why? Of course. Oh, my idea was centered around knight g4 and having a sort of a surprise two piece attack against h2. If h3, then I thought this is still not bad for black when the knight repositions himself by moving to, or positions himself on e5. And there's the strong square d3, and that knight's really in the thick of things. This is what I go for. My opponent responded in a way that was different from what I anticipated. I had thought there would be pawn to h3 is maybe a little bit more natural, but pawn to g3 was played, and with knight to e5, we see that black can both protect with knight to e5 and then knight to c3. Black can both protect the pawn on e4 and establish an outpost and win a tempo of initiative against the rook on c1 by playing knight to d3. This is an elegant move, a good move, which looks like white can exploit it with an immediate capture on e4. I don't know. Most moves here are gonna lead towards mostly equal. Is equal game, a queenless middle game. Rook to c2. And so now we're seeing a little bit of why this game was considered inaccurate. Just these tactics here in the middle didn't work out all that well in terms of accuracy. I did find knight takes b4, thankfully. This is the best move for black. And when the knight's recaptured, I'll have two pawns. I'll have a two-pawn lead against my opponent. Right, getting the move order right. A takes b4, and then rook takes e4. And we have to calculate certain side variations, like what if my opponent played knight to f6? Well, we capture, and then there's a capture on b4. It's slightly it's slightly better for white than what was played in the game. The immediate capture of the knight here, I'm critical of that. The immediate capture of the knight here, I'm critical. That's not a good move. A takes b4 is a bad move. White needs to play knight to f6 check. Then I have to capture back with my pawn. And I have a bad queenside or kingside pawn structure. In a rook and pawn endgame, this is in some endgames this would be no big deal. In a rook and pawn endgame, 2 rooks per side or 1 rook per side, rooks and pawns, this is a very big deal. I'll be back in just a second. All right, here I am. In this Zwischenzug, knight takes f6. This would be an important way for white to try to level the endgame before it starts. And we see black is probably still doing fine due to the one extra pawn that he has. But it's not quite as strong it's not quite as optimistic for black as this eventuality, where he has the extra pawn with only two pawn islands. With only 2 pawn islands, as opposed to before where there were 3, with double pawns included. Not only that, but this pawn is about to be stopped in its tracks with rook d8, and black is going to use these 2 isolated pawns, these 2 isolanis, as the basis for gathering more material and threatening promotions on the queen side, where he has 3 pawns connected. g6 just to get some breathing room for my king. It will most likely relieve some back rank threats in certain variations later on. They're not here yet, but there's not much going on in this position. So even though Torch considers this an inaccuracy, how much better can black play than g6? It's not clear that it's all that much of a bad move. Anyway. This is disappointing. I'm disappointed by this game. That rook e3 was a mistake. I'm disappointed by that. My thought was that this pawn isn't going anywhere, or if it is, it's going to be trades of material, which will help black. And by rook to e3, I can skirt over to b3, capture on b4, and be ahead more material. So I'm upset that I played I'm upset that I played a mistake there. We'll get back into the swing of things by exchanging rooks, and the d pawn will fall because there are no pieces that can defend it. Pawn to c5 makes use of a pin on b4, so black's going to go up even more material, daring a trade of rooks, which would lead to promotion of black's pawn on b1. So my opponent has to skirt out of the way, and we push the c pawn now, simply to keep it protected and out of danger. I went for pawn to b5, mostly as a way to cut white's rook off of the a file, or I don't know if that's why I did it, but it does that if I wanted to. This pawn is now pretty, this this is hard to stop. All right, this is hard to stop. So my opponent's inching his king forward, inching the king forward, inching his king forward, and I'm going to play king to g7 to prevent checkmates that could occur should my opponent wedge his king onto h6 or f6, and then manage to also get in rook to c8, and that would be checkmate, as now the king would be guarding the g7 square, and the rook is making use of a back rank checkmate presented to him only by way of His Royal Majesty's assistance. But I can play g6 to cut all of that out, and I can play king g7 to cut all of that out, and now black is definitely winning this game. Yeah, I played this trade of pawns by making c3. that's fine. I did fine with the endgame as it were. But let's take a look. What happens if black just starts pushing the A pawn, like wildly? All right. So the A pawn idea was quite strong as well. In the game, I played c3 to trade a couple pawns, and we find another way to. Yeah, after the trade of rooks here on the third rank, this B pawn's got to promote. Okay. That's going to be it for this broadcast session. That's going to be it for this broadcast session. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.